Buddy had been blind for almost 2 years, but the moment the bandages came off, he suddenly backed into the corner of the recovery room and began shaking like he had just seen something terrifying. The nurses froze. One of the machines started beeping rapidly as the golden retriever pressed himself against the wall, his cloudy eyes darting wildly around the room for the very first time in years. Claire Dawson felt her stomach drop. Just seconds earlier, everyone had been smiling, expecting a beautiful reunion moment after the risky surgery that had cost nearly everything she had. But now her dog looked terrified of the world itself. "Buddy, sweetheart, it's okay," Claire whispered, slowly stepping toward him with tears already forming in her eyes. But instead of running into her arms like he always used to, Buddy lowered his body and let out a soft, nervous whine that nobody in the room had ever heard before. Dr. Mason Reed quickly signaled for everyone to stay calm, while one of the veterinary assistants reached over to silence the monitor alarms. The small animal clinic in suburban Ohio had gone completely silent except for Buddy's uneven breathing and the sound of rain tapping lightly against the windows outside. Claire could barely breathe herself. For months, she had dreamed about this exact moment. She had imagined Buddy seeing her face again, wagging his tail, maybe even crying with happiness. Instead, her beloved dog looked completely overwhelmed, like a frightened puppy trapped somewhere unfamiliar. The sight shattered her heart instantly. Buddy had once been the happiest dog in the neighborhood. Every morning, he waited by the front window for Claire to come downstairs. He loved chasing tennis balls across the backyard and greeting every neighbor like they were lifelong friends. But slowly, something inside him had changed. First came the hesitation on the stairs. Then he stopped catching toys. Then one afternoon, he walked directly into the kitchen table so hard that Claire rushed him to the emergency vet in tears. The diagnosis had destroyed her. Progressive blindness. Within months, the darkness completely took over Buddy's world. At first he tried, pretending nothing was wrong. He memorized the house carefully, counting steps from room to room. But eventually, even familiar spaces became terrifying. He stopped playing, stopped wagging his tail. Some nights, Claire would wake up hearing him crying softly beside the couch after getting lost in his own home. And when Dr. Reed offered a dangerous surgery with only a small chance of success, Claire didn't hesitate. She emptied her savings account the very next day. Now, standing inside the recovery room under harsh fluorescent lights, she could feel panic rising in her chest as Buddy refused to look at her. The nurses exchanged worried glances while Dr. Reed slowly crouched near the trembling dog. Then suddenly, Buddy stopped shaking. His ears lifted slightly. His breathing changed. And without warning, the blind dog turned his head toward the far corner of the room and stared intensely at something nobody else could see. Nobody in the recovery room understood why Buddy kept staring into the empty corner near the supply cabinet. But Claire noticed something that made her chest tighten even more. His tail was not wagging. For most dogs, fear came with barking or pacing or frantic movement. But Buddy had always been different. Ever since losing his sight, he had learned to become painfully quiet whenever he felt overwhelmed. It was almost as if darkness had slowly taught him to disappear emotionally before he disappeared physically. Dr. Mason Reed carefully stepped back and lowered his voice, telling everyone to give Buddy space while his brain adjusted to processing light again. Claire nodded, but her hands were trembling badly as she crouched near the floor, trying not to cry in front of him. She remembered the first time she realized something inside Buddy had truly broken. It had happened nearly 8 months earlier during a neighborhood barbecue. Before his blindness became severe, Buddy loved people more than anything. He used to greet children at the fence, steal hot dog buns from picnic tables, and proudly carry tennis balls twice the size of his mouth. But that afternoon, while families laughed around the backyard, Buddy stayed hidden under the patio table. For almost 3 hours. He did not react to voices. He did not respond to treats. Even when Claire called his name repeatedly, he only flinched quietly like he was afraid of the sound itself. That was the moment she understood his blindness was no longer just physical. It was changing who he was inside. Over time, Buddy stopped doing all the little things that once made him feel alive. He no longer waited by the front door in the mornings. He no longer followed Claire from room to room. Sometimes he would stand completely still in the middle of the hallway for several minutes, too frightened to keep walking because he could not tell where the walls were anymore. Claire started leaving small battery candles around the house at night, even though the veterinarian told her it would not help him see. Somehow it still made her feel less guilty. The hardest part was watching Buddy slowly lose confidence in himself. He had once loved thunderstorms, always sitting by the window listening to rain hit the glass. But after his blindness worsened, storms terrified him. Every loud sound seemed to come from nowhere. Every shadowless room became a trap. Claire began sleeping on the living room couch beside his dog bed because if she left him alone too long, he would wake up crying softly in panic. Some nights, he would press his body tightly against the couch just to make sure she was still there. The surgery had become their final hope after months of emotional exhaustion. Claire worked extra shifts at a grocery store outside Columbus and secretly sold jewelry passed down from her grandmother just to afford the procedure. Dr. Reed had warned her carefully that even if the operation succeeded physically, there was no guarantee Buddy would emotionally recover from years spent living in fear. At the time, Claire barely listened because she only cared about giving him one more chance at happiness. But now, watching Buddy silently stare into the corner of the room without blinking, she suddenly wondered if something deeper had been damaged long ago. Then Emily Parker quietly walked into the recovery room holding Buddy's old blue leash from home. The moment the leash jingled softly in her hand, Buddy immediately turned away from the corner and lowered his head toward the floor like he recognized the sound from somewhere painful. Claire tried convincing herself that Buddy only needed time to adjust to seeing again, but over the next 24 hours, his behavior became stranger in ways nobody inside the clinic could explain. It started with reflections. Every time sunlight bounced off metal surfaces or windows, Buddy reacted instantly. His ears would shoot upward, and his entire body would tense like he was hearing danger approach. At first, Dr. Mason Reed assumed the dog was simply overstimulated after years of blindness, but then the reactions became impossible to ignore. Whenever someone carrying something reflective entered the room, Buddy would quietly retreat backward until his body touched the nearest wall. He did not bark. He did not growl. He simply watched with a strange nervous intensity that made everyone uncomfortable. Claire noticed it first when a nurse rolled in a stainless steel tray holding medications. The second Buddy saw the glimmer from the overhead lights, he immediately tucked his tail tightly under his body and crawled beneath the chair beside Claire's legs. The movement shocked her because Buddy had never hidden from people before losing his sight. Maybe the lights are bothering him, Emily suggested gently while kneeling beside the trembling dog. But the strange reactions kept happening even in dim lighting. Late that evening, while heavy rain moved across the town outside, Buddy suddenly stood up from his blanket and walked directly toward the clinic hallway for the first time since surgery. Claire's face lit up with cautious hope as she followed him quietly from behind. At first she thought he simply needed water, but Buddy ignored his bowl completely. Instead, he stopped in front of a dark window near the reception desk and stared at his own reflection for nearly 2 full minutes without moving. The hallway remained silent except for distant thunder outside and the low hum of fluorescent lights above them. Then Buddy slowly lifted one paw and touched the glass carefully like he was trying to understand who the animal inside the window was. Claire felt tears fill her eyes instantly. For a moment, she thought maybe Buddy was finally recognizing himself again after years of darkness. But suddenly his entire body stiffened. Without warning, Buddy jerked backward violently and let out a sharp cry that echoed through the empty hallway. Claire jumped in shock as the dog scrambled away from the window and nearly slipped across the polished floor, trying to escape his own reflection. Dr. Reed rushed over immediately after hearing the noise, while Emily switched on more lights near the front desk. Buddy was breathing hard now, pacing in nervous circles around Claire instead of calming down. "This is not normal," Dr. Reed admitted quietly, while watching the frightened retriever avoid every reflective surface around him. Claire's stomach tightened hearing those words. She had spent months praying for this surgery to work, but now she could not stop wondering if Buddy's mind had somehow become trapped between blindness and sight. The following morning things became even stranger. A delivery driver arrived carrying several silver oxygen tanks for the clinic storage room. The second the tanks rolled across the tile floor, making a soft metallic sound, Buddy completely froze near the doorway. His eyes widened. His breathing slowed. Then, to everyone's horror, The golden retriever slowly lowered himself flat against the ground and covered his face with both paws as though he was trying to hide from something he recognized. By the third day after surgery, the atmosphere inside the clinic had completely changed. The hopeful excitement that once surrounded Buddy's recovery was slowly turning into quiet concern. Staff members who had originally celebrated the operation now avoided sudden movements around him because nobody knew what might trigger another strange reaction. Claire could feel it every time someone entered the room with forced smiles and careful voices. They no longer looked at Buddy like a miracle patient. They looked at him like a problem they could not explain. Dr. Mason Reed spent hours reviewing surgical scans and post-operation reports searching for answers, but medically, everything appeared successful. Buddy's eyes were healing exactly as expected. There were no signs of infection, no neurological damage, no complications. Yet the dog's behavior kept growing more disturbing in subtle ways that made people uneasy. He refused to walk near mirrors. He panicked whenever metallic objects reflected light near his face. And worst of all, he had started reacting strangely to Claire herself. The first time it happened nearly broke her heart. She had returned from grabbing coffee across the street, while Emily stayed behind watching Buddy. The moment Claire stepped back into the recovery room carrying 2 paper cups, Buddy immediately stiffened. Instead of recognizing her voice and calming down, he slowly backed away until his body hit the wall again. Claire stopped walking instantly, confused by the fear in his eyes. "Buddy, it is me," she whispered softly while kneeling down. But the dog would not come closer. He kept staring directly at the silver bracelet hanging from Claire's wrist, trembling harder with every second. Emily gently asked Claire to remove the bracelet, thinking perhaps the reflected light was upsetting him. The second Claire unclasped it and placed it on the counter, Buddy relaxed slightly and lowered his head. The room fell silent. Nobody wanted to say what they were all beginning to think. Later that afternoon, Dr. Reed quietly pulled Claire aside near the clinic hallway. His expression looked exhausted. "I need to prepare you for something difficult," he said carefully. Claire immediately felt sick hearing his tone. Dr. Reed explained that prolonged blindness sometimes caused emotional trauma in animals after vision returned. Certain visual triggers could create confusion, panic, or unpredictable stress responses. Most dogs adapted within days. But Buddy was becoming more fearful instead of less. Claire tried defending him instantly, insisting he was just overwhelmed after years spent in darkness. But even she could no longer ignore how unstable he seemed. Earlier that morning, a young boy visiting the clinic had accidentally rolled a shiny toy car across the waiting room floor. The tiny flash of reflected light caused Buddy to leap sideways so suddenly that he knocked over a chair, trying to escape. Nobody got hurt, but the frightened child burst into tears while his mother quickly demanded the dog be restrained. Claire had never felt so humiliated in her life. For the first time since adopting him, she saw fear in other people's faces when they looked at Buddy. That night, Emily stayed late helping organize paperwork while Buddy rested quietly near the office door. At least, he appeared quiet. Suddenly, Emily heard soft scratching sounds coming from inside the records room. When she opened the door, her blood ran cold. Buddy had somehow pushed himself beneath a desk in the far corner and was frantically trying to cover every reflective surface in the room with loose papers from the floor. Family photos, framed certificates, computer screens, anything that showed a reflection. Claire rushed in moments later and froze in disbelief watching her exhausted dog desperately hide every shiny object he could find. Dr. Reed stared silently for several seconds before finally saying the words Claire feared most. "If this keeps escalating," he said quietly, "we may need to transfer Buddy to a behavioral rehabilitation facility before someone gets hurt." Claire barely slept after hearing Dr. Reed mention transferring Buddy away. The idea of losing him after fighting so hard to save his vision felt unbearable, yet even she could not deny how strange his behavior had become. Early the next morning, gray clouds covered the small Ohio town, while the clinic slowly came to life around them. Emily Parker arrived first carrying coffee and fresh towels, expecting another stressful day managing Buddy's unpredictable reactions. But the moment she stepped into the recovery area, she noticed something unusual. For the first time since surgery, Buddy was not hiding. Instead, He sat completely still near the office doorway with his ears sharply raised toward the front reception desk. Emily paused quietly, watching him. His body looked tense, but not frightened. It almost looked focused. Then the automatic front door opened. A man wearing a dark delivery jacket entered carrying a polished metal toolbox in one hand while speaking on his phone. The second Buddy heard the faint metallic clink from the toolbox. His reaction changed instantly. He jumped to his feet and rushed forward so suddenly that Emily nearly dropped her coffee cup. "Buddy, stop!" she shouted, terrified he might panic again in front of another visitor. But instead of retreating or trembling, Buddy planted himself directly in front of the man and refused to move. His tail stayed rigid. His breathing slowed. And for the first time in days, he did not look confused. The delivery driver laughed nervously while trying to step around him, but Buddy shifted sideways every single time, blocking his path without making a sound. Emily's stomach tightened. There was something deeply unusual about the way Buddy moved. He was not acting fearful. He was acting deliberate. Dr. Reed quickly walked out from the back hallway after hearing the commotion. The moment he approached, Buddy finally backed away, but his eyes never left the metal toolbox. "I am sorry," Emily said awkwardly while helping the confused driver sign paperwork. "He has been acting strange after surgery." The man shrugged politely and carried the toolbox into the maintenance room near the clinic basement before leaving minutes later. Once the door closed behind him, Buddy immediately relaxed and quietly returned to his blanket without another sound. The entire encounter lasted less than 2 minutes, but Emily could not stop thinking about it afterward. Something about Buddy's reaction felt different from the panic episodes before. That afternoon, while organizing supplies inside the records office, Emily accidentally knocked over a stack of old folders near the desk Buddy had hidden beneath the night before. As papers scattered across the floor, one small laminated card slid loose from between the folders and landed near her shoe. Emily bent down absent-mindedly and froze. It was an old intake form from nearly 3 years earlier. Buddy's name appeared across the top, but something else immediately caught her attention. Under the emergency incident notes section, one sentence had been highlighted in yellow marker by someone long ago. Dog became distressed after exposure to reflective emergency equipment during apartment fire evacuation. Emily read the line 3 times. Apartment fire? Claire had never mentioned any fire. Her pulse quickened as she continued scanning the faded report. According to the document, Buddy had temporarily disappeared during a building evacuation after an electrical fire broke out in Claire's old apartment complex almost 2 years before his blindness became severe. He was eventually found trembling beneath a parked vehicle surrounded by shattered reflective debris from emergency vehicles and broken mirrors. Emily slowly looked toward Buddy, sleeping quietly across the room. Suddenly the fear, the reflections, the metallic sounds, the desperate attempts to cover shiny surfaces all felt less random than before. And when Claire returned carrying food later that evening, Emily quietly closed the file and made a decision she could no longer ignore. She was going to investigate exactly what happened during that apartment fire. Emily waited until after sunset before bringing up the apartment fire to Claire. The clinic had grown quiet for the night, and soft rain tapped against the windows while Buddy rested near the reception desk with his head lowered between his paws. Claire looked confused the moment Emily mentioned the old intake report. For several seconds, she said nothing at all. Then her expression slowly changed. "I never told anyone about that night," she whispered. Dr. Mason Reed stepped closer immediately, sensing something important hidden beneath her voice. Claire explained that nearly 2 years earlier, an electrical fire had broken out in the apartment building where she and Buddy used to live. The smoke alarms failed at first, and most residents did not realize there was danger until flames spread through the upper floor hallways. Claire had been asleep during the evacuation chaos. According to firefighters, Buddy was the one who woke her up. He scratched her bedroom door repeatedly and barked until she opened her eyes to thick smoke filling the apartment. Claire managed to escape safely because of him. But during the confusion outside, Buddy disappeared. Firefighters searched for almost 30 terrifying minutes before finding him hiding beneath an emergency vehicle surrounded by shattered reflective debris from broken equipment and cracked mirrors scattered across the wet pavement. Claire lowered her eyes while remembering the night. "After that fire," she said quietly, "he was never fully the same." Dr. Reed listened carefully while glancing toward Buddy across the room. Suddenly, the pieces no longer felt random. The reflections, the metallic sounds, the panic around emergency equipment. It all traced back to trauma connected to the worst night of the dog's life. But something still did not explain why Buddy kept reacting so intensely inside the clinic itself. Emily then remembered the delivery driver from earlier that morning. What company was he even from? She asked suddenly. Dr. Reed frowned slightly because the clinic had not actually ordered maintenance work that day. Confused, he walked to the front desk computer and checked the visitor log. No scheduled delivery appeared anywhere in the system. The room fell silent. Claire slowly looked toward the maintenance hallway where the man had carried the silver toolbox earlier. Buddy noticed immediately. The second everyone turned toward the hallway, the golden retriever stood up and stared at the basement door again with frightening focus. Not fear. Focus. Dr. Reed grabbed a flashlight while Emily unlocked the lower storage area connected to the clinic basement. The air downstairs smelled damp and stale as pipes hummed softly behind the concrete walls. Buddy followed closely behind them for the first time since surgery without trembling or hesitating. Every few feet he stopped and looked toward the far end of the hallway near the electrical control room. Claire's heartbeat pounded harder with every step. Then Dr. Reed suddenly froze. The heavy metal door leading into the maintenance room had fresh scratch marks near the lock, as though someone had tried forcing it open recently. Emily slowly pushed the door wider while Dr. Reed aimed the flashlight inside. The beam swept across shelves of medical supplies before landing on something strange near the electrical panel. A black backpack sat partially hidden behind storage boxes. Nobody recognized it. Dr. Reed carefully unzipped the bag, and his face immediately lost color. Inside were burglary tools, clinic security schedules, and several stolen prescription labels from nearby veterinary offices. Claire covered her mouth in shock. The delivery driver had never been a delivery driver at all. He had used the clinic to scout the building for theft. Suddenly, everything became horrifyingly clear. Buddy had not been reacting randomly to reflections or metallic objects. He recognized the same combination of sounds, flashing surfaces, and movements connected to the traumatic night he once survived. Long before any human noticed something was wrong, the dog had sensed danger inside the clinic again and spent days desperately trying to warn them. Claire slowly turned toward Buddy, standing quietly at the doorway, and tears instantly filled her eyes as the full weight of their mistake crashed over her. The basement remained completely silent after Dr. Reed opened the backpack. Nobody moved for several seconds. The only sound came from the old ventilation pipes humming softly above their heads, while Buddy stood quietly near the doorway, watching them all. Claire felt her knees weaken as memories from the past several days replayed violently inside her mind. Every frightened reaction, every moment he hid from reflective surfaces, every desperate attempt to cover mirrors and shiny objects with papers. None of it had been madness. None of it had been aggression. Buddy had spent days trying to protect the people around him from danger, while everyone slowly lost faith in him instead. Claire suddenly remembered the fear in his eyes whenever metallic sounds echoed through the clinic hallways. It was the exact same fear he must have felt during the apartment fire years ago while surrounded by emergency lights, broken glass, and chaos. Her chest tightened painfully, realizing the dog had connected those terrifying memories to the stranger carrying the metal toolbox long before any human noticed something was wrong. And instead of running away from danger this time, Buddy stayed. He stayed despite being terrified. Emily slowly lowered herself to the concrete floor, covering her mouth with shaking hands while staring at the golden retriever. He was trying to warn us, she whispered weakly. Dr. Reed looked devastated. Just hours earlier, he had seriously discussed sending Buddy away to a behavioral rehabilitation center because he believed the dog had become emotionally unstable after surgery. Now every assumption felt cruel. The veterinarian slowly removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes in silence before walking toward Buddy carefully. The golden retriever did not retreat this time. He simply watched Dr. Reed approach with tired eyes that suddenly looked older than before. "Buddy," Dr. Reed said quietly, his voice heavy with guilt. "You were never broken, were you?" The dog tilted his head slightly, as though recognizing the softness in the man's tone. Claire could not hold herself together anymore. She dropped to her knees beside Buddy and wrapped both arms tightly around his neck. For a moment, the dog seemed startled by the sudden emotion, but then something changed. Slowly, almost uncertainly, Buddy rested his head against Claire's shoulder for the first time since the surgery. The movement was small, but it shattered everyone emotionally. Claire buried her face into his fur while tears soaked through his golden coat. "I thought you were scared of the world," she whispered through sobs. "But you were trying to save us again." Buddy closed his eyes quietly, as if exhausted from carrying fear nobody understood. Emily turned away, wiping tears from her face, while remembering how terrified Buddy looked every time shiny objects appeared around him. The dog had not been reacting to random reflections at all. Those flashes reminded him of the worst night of his life. Yet somehow he still forced himself toward danger because he sensed something wrong inside the clinic. The realization made the entire room feel unbearably emotional. Dr. Reed carefully zipped the backpack, closed before calling local police to report the break-in attempt and suspicious visitor. Officers later confirmed the man matched descriptions connected to multiple veterinary clinic thefts across neighboring counties. If Buddy had not reacted when he did, the intruder likely would have returned after hours when the building sat empty overnight. Claire looked down at Buddy in complete disbelief. Blind or not, frightened or not, he had protected people once again exactly like he did during the apartment fire years earlier. Only this time, everyone almost abandoned him for it. As police lights flashed faintly outside the clinic windows above them, Dr. Reed crouched beside Claire with a decision already made. "Buddy is not going anywhere," he said firmly. "From this moment on, we stop treating him like a problem and start helping him heal from what he survived." The following week, the clinic no longer treated Buddy like a patient under observation. Slowly, without anyone formally saying it aloud, he became the heart of the entire building. Dr. Mason Reed canceled the transfer paperwork immediately and personally redesigned one of the recovery rooms into a calmer space made entirely for Buddy's comfort. The fluorescent ceiling lights that once reflected harshly across metal surfaces were replaced with soft amber lamps. Stainless steel trays disappeared from sight. Computer screens were covered when not in use. Even the staff badges were switched from shiny plastic holders to matte cloth clips after Emily noticed Buddy relaxing whenever reflections disappeared from the room. For the first time since surgery, people stopped trying to control his reactions and started trying to understand them instead. The difference changed everything. Each morning Claire arrived carrying Buddy's favorite blue blanket from home, while Emily quietly played soft acoustic music through a small speaker near the reception desk. At first, Buddy still moved cautiously through the clinic hallways, pausing whenever unfamiliar sounds echoed nearby. But something inside him slowly began shifting. Instead of hiding under chairs or flattening himself against walls, he started looking toward people again. One afternoon, a nervous rescue dog arrived for treatment after being found wandering near a highway. The frightened animal trembled uncontrollably inside the waiting room, refusing to let anyone approach. To everyone's surprise, Buddy slowly walked over and quietly laid down several feet away from the terrified dog without making a sound. He stayed there nearly 20 minutes, calm and patient, until the rescue dog eventually stopped shaking. Emily watched the entire moment with tears in her eyes. "He knows what fear feels like," she whispered softly. Word about Buddy's story slowly spread through the clinic staff and neighboring offices. But what touched people most was not the surgery or even the attempted break-in. It was the realization that despite carrying years of fear connected to the apartment fire, Buddy still chose to protect others the moment he sensed danger again. One evening, Dr. Reed gathered the staff after closing time and quietly rolled a large object covered beneath a blanket into the recovery room. Claire looked confused until Emily gently pulled the blanket away. Underneath sat a custom wooden window frame built by local volunteers. Instead of reflective glass, the frame held soft, translucent panels designed to glow warmly in sunlight without creating sharp reflections or glare. Tiny painted flowers decorated the corners alongside Buddy's name carved carefully into the wood. "We wanted him to have a window again," Emily explained quietly. Claire immediately covered her mouth as emotion overwhelmed her. Before losing his sight, Buddy had spent hours sitting beside apartment windows watching the outside world. After the fire, windows became one of his deepest fears because every reflection reminded him of flashing emergency lights and shattered glass. Dr. Reed slowly placed the frame near Buddy's bed, where late evening sunlight streamed gently through the clinic wall. At first, Buddy stayed back, cautiously, while the warm golden light filled the room. Then, little by little, he stepped closer. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The golden retriever stood silently in front of the glowing frame, while soft sunlight touched his face without a single harsh reflection frightening him away. His ears relaxed first. Then his breathing slowed. Finally, after several long seconds, Buddy lowered himself onto the blanket, directly beside the glowing window, and rested his head peacefully against the floor. Claire looked down in disbelief as his tail gave one slow, gentle wag against the blanket. For the first time since the surgery, Buddy fell asleep without hiding from the light. Months later, people visiting the clinic still asked about the golden retriever who once hid from every reflection. By then, Buddy no longer slept in the recovery room. Dr. Mason Reed had transformed a quiet corner near the front reception desk into a permanent resting space just for him, complete with the glowing window frame, soft blankets, and shelves filled with toys donated by local families who heard his story. Children stopped asking to see the fish tank when they entered the clinic. Instead, they looked for Buddy. Somehow the dog who once feared the world had become the calmest presence in the building. Claire noticed the changes little by little. Buddy no longer froze at metallic sounds. He no longer trembled when sunlight touched the floor. Some fears still lingered quietly inside him, especially during storms, but now he faced them differently. Instead of hiding beneath furniture, he would walk slowly toward the glowing window and lay beside it until his breathing settled again. It became his safe place. The clinic staff often joked that Buddy trusted the wooden window more than actual windows now, but privately everyone understood what it truly represented. It was not just comfort. It was proof that healing sometimes begins the moment someone finally understands your fear instead of punishing you for it. One cold Saturday afternoon near the start of winter, Claire arrived at the clinic carrying an old cardboard box she had discovered while unpacking belongings from storage. Inside were photographs recovered after the apartment fire years earlier. Most were damaged by smoke and water, but one picture survived almost perfectly. It showed a younger Buddy sitting proudly beside the apartment window he used to love before the fire changed everything. Sunlight poured across his fur while he stared outside with bright, happy eyes. Emily quietly placed the photograph beside the glowing wooden frame, near Buddy's bed. For several long seconds, nobody said anything. Then something unexpected happened. Buddy slowly walked toward the old photograph and lowered his nose against the corner of the frame. His tail moved gently once against the floor. Claire felt tears fill her eyes because for the first time in years, the image no longer seemed connected to fear or loss. It looked like memory, peaceful memory. That evening, the clinic became unusually busy after a snowstorm caused several minor pet emergencies around town. Nervous animals filled the waiting room, while worried owners crowded near the reception desk. In the middle of all the noise and confusion, a frightened rescue puppy suddenly slipped free from its owner's arms and darted across the tile floor shaking in panic. Before anyone could react, the tiny dog rushed directly beneath Buddy's glowing window corner and curled tightly beside him. The entire room went quiet watching what happened next. Buddy slowly lifted his head, looked down at the trembling puppy beside him, and gently rested one paw over the smaller dog's back. The frightened puppy stopped shaking almost immediately. Claire turned away, wiping tears from her face, while Emily quietly smiled beside her. Nobody in the clinic spoke for several seconds because deep down they all realized the same thing at once. Buddy had finally become for someone else what nobody had been for him during his darkest moments. Outside, snow continued falling softly against the windows while warm amber light filled the little corner where the two dogs rested together peacefully. And for the first time in a very long time, Buddy looked completely unafraid of the light. Sometimes the bravest hearts are the ones that keep protecting others even after being broken themselves.